So just a reminder to please mute your microphones. You will have the opportunity to unmute them later on in the course of the Q&A in particular. All right, outstanding. And with this, I believe we are ready to begin. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, myself perhaps as well, but possibly my screen is more important at this point. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to this third in our series of webinars, of e-learning webinars on safe and efficient urban mobility for Africa, which we are organizing in partnership with the African Development Bank. And I know we have a number of AFDB colleagues on the call today, so a special welcome to them in particular. Today, for the third webinar in the series, we are going to take a deeper look at traffic impact assessments, a topic which we already started addressing a month ago during our first webinar. So we are going to continue exploring this important topic, the hows and whys of traffic impact assessments. Juste un mot rapide de bienvenue pour nos collègues francophones qui nous rejoignent. Je vous rappelle que ce webinaire dispose d'un service d'interprétation simultanée et j'en profite pour remercier nos collègues interprètes vers le français, donc depuis l'anglais vers le français. Vous avez le choix de la langue au moment où vous rejoignez le webinaire. Vous pouvez également activer cette option tout au long de la réunion. Je vous rappelle également, donc, les questions peuvent être posées indifféremment en français ou en anglais, à travers l'option chat en particulier. D'autre part, il vous sera fait un compte-rendu en langue française qui vous sera envoyé à l'issue de ce webinaire. J'en profite pour remercier nos collègues d'Apsur, qui sont nos partenaires francophones pour cette série de webinaires et ce programme avec la Banque africaine de développement. So we're together for the next hour and 15 minutes. As I said earlier, we have a lot of content to share, and we want to make sure that there's enough time for not just questions, but an opportunity perhaps to share some insights and experiences that you have had or challenges that you have encountered in producing traffic impact assessments. After the webinar, you will receive a full copy of the presentation, the full recording of the webinar. You will also have the ability to request certificates, which will be delivered by the International Road Federation. As I mentioned earlier on, please take a moment to let us know through the chat function where you are joining us from. So the country, in particular, the city that you're joining us from. I think this is a good opportunity to get a sense of the geographic scope addressed through this program. Just on another technical note, please make sure that your microphones are muted throughout the presentation, again, for everyone's comfort. Earlier, I mentioned that this program is supported and run with the help of the African Development Bank. And I want to take this opportunity to highlight the important work of the Urban and Municipal Development Fund, so UMDF, which is run or hosted by the African Development Bank. This UMDF provides expertise, but also capacity building and ultimately support in the development of your sustainable...
3:30. I'm expecting that she actually went somewhere, so she said on her way back she'll pick me up. Yes.
In the development of your sustainable urban projects, and we encourage you to make use of this instrument. It's available for you as African cities. I will provide in the chat a link to the UMDF so you can find out how to perhaps apply for support through this capacity building and funding instrument set up by the African Development Bank. Again, a reminder, many of you have joined some of our previous webinars, so you'll be familiar with the overall goal of the program, which is to help you build through these kind of e-learning webinars, but also mentorship services. I'll come back on those to help you formulate strategies for safe and efficient urban mobility that are directly applicable to your city. We are covering a number of practice areas throughout these webinars. Today we will be focusing on the first two, but as you will see in my next slide, there is also a separate track dealing with traffic safety and strategies and engineering tools at the city level to reduce road traffic injuries. Again, this is illustrated through this program workflow, which I'm showing here. We are now in part 2 of the e-learning webinar, or this cycle on traffic impact assessments, forming one of the tracks of the program. And the other track, as I mentioned earlier, focusing more on traffic safety. We will meet again. Hopefully all of you are in the process or have signed up to our final webinar, which will take place next Wednesday. And we will be looking at how cities, municipalities across the African continent can establish effective road safety strategies. And we'll be looking at some examples and good practice guidelines based on different case studies around the world. I want to spend a moment maybe reminding you of what happens next after these webinars. First of all, we will be sharing with you after this webinar, and also after next week's webinar, a template for a city diagnosis and action plan. This is an optional part of the program, but nonetheless, we encourage you to take a look at this. And the idea here is drawing on the main findings, the main recommendations and practices presented during the webinars. We want you to formulate a city-level diagnosis as well as long-term action plans that can be put in place to relieve urban congestion and provide safer and more accessible streets for all. You will see that the template for the city diagnosis and action plan is designed in such a way to guide you through the process, help you establish the root causes of congestion and traffic risk, again at the traffic injury risk, I apologize, at the in the zones or the cities that you would be studying as part of this diagnosis and action plan. We want to see whether you are in a position to establish these traffic impact assessments and to fully appreciate the impacts of ongoing urban developments, knowing how fast African cities are developing. And this is an opportunity to also outline your longer-term aspirations and how these in turn are guiding perhaps some shorter-term actions that stakeholders can agree are necessary in your respective cities. We will take this opportunity to also ask you to self-identify, self-assess some gaps in the areas perhaps of skill sets or applied knowledge areas where you think perhaps more interventions are needed in order to perhaps upskill municipal staff that are dealing with these questions. So again, all of this will become clear in the these action plans that we will be sharing after today's webinar. These action plans, then, we will continue discussing them in the context of our workshops. It'll be an opportunity to meet face-to-face for a number of you. They will take place in Accra, in Ghana, on April 25th, on the pre-opening day of the 3rd IRF Africa Regional Congress and Exhibition. There's a lot of information that's already published on the website of our regional congress. Again, I will be sharing this link in the chat. I wanted to remind you that as program participants, you will have complimentary access to the full congress. The goal of these workshops is really to kind of draw from the theory and progressively transition to applied practices. And these two workshops on April 25th will be a reflection of the two tracks that we have established for the program. One of the workshops will deal with developing traffic impact assessments. We'll start looking at the tools, the kind of simulation software modeling tools that are available and that can be applied in your respective cities. And the second workshop will focus on these road safety strategies. But again, we will be moving progressively from theory to introducing good practices that can be introduced in your respective cities. All right, so we now come to the end of this introduction. And I take this opportunity to hand over to our track champion, Adam Lynch. It's a pleasure, Adam, to welcome you back. So Adam is a familiar face for a number of you. He is the Senior Project Manager for Traffic Engineering at PCV. Adam, I believe you have close to 2 decades of experience in developing traffic modeling studies and design, and you are therefore the ideal knowledge companion for this cycle of webinars. So without further ado, Adam, I don't know if you've opened your camera yet, but if you haven't, I encourage you to do so and take over at this point. Yes, I can see you. Welcome, Adam.
Oh, good. Let's say, if not, then we have some technical problems. Okay, so everyone can see me and hear me, and let's get going. We have quite a few slides that in this presentation track, so I'm going to try to move pretty quickly. The goal of these slides will be more for handouts, and this course is the second part, as Brendan mentioned, to the traffic impact assessment sort of track that we're doing. And we're closely organizing these two talks with this course reference manual. And within this manual, you can learn pretty much everything about traffic impact assessment. It looks at a lot of widely adopted international practices. So it's a great guide and go-to as we're discussing today and the previous workshop, and as you continue on applying these concepts and policies into your local region. So if you haven't downloaded this manual yet, please do so. It's a really good one. For those who did not attend the last workshop, we covered a lot of the background information, so hopefully you won't be too lost in this webinar. But it was about the kind of the theories and why we're doing a traffic impact assessment, as well as how to collect data for a traffic impact assessment. And then we even got to the point where we started talking about developing the existing year and opening year conditions for the next step, which we'll talk about today. And so today's agenda, we're going to expand on all of that previously, and we're going to start with how to do this trip generation process for your development. And how to also distribute and assign these trips throughout the local transportation network. And then we'll apply these trips on top of different traffic scenarios. Capacity analysis, I'll probably go through very quickly, believe it or not, since I'm actually really fond of capacity analysis, but I'll go through it fast. And then we'll get into safety and proposed mitigations and how to handle these impacts within this TIA process. And then lastly, we can quickly go over just a few key points on the review and approval process. So again, a full agenda. But let's jump in, and we're going to start, as I mentioned, with trip generation. And trip generation is the process of estimating the number of or the amount of traffic that will be generated by a development. And this traffic can be traveling to and from the development. So it's just not radiating out, it's also coming in. And it's using the transportation network, meaning that it's using its roads, it's using its sidewalks, things like that. And if you remember from the last webinar, we started with this area statement table, and this is kind of the first step to trip generation. So this area statement table is what you use to talk to your local agencies when you're saying, hey, I have a traffic impact assessment, we should work together. What are these assumptions that I have, and does everything look okay to you? So you start off with that first kickoff meeting. So you show them this table. But then we're going to expand on this table. And when you expand on this table, then you start adding things like, where the trips are coming in and out, or how many of the trips are coming in and out of each site, and also look at the certain peak hours for these trips. So it really builds out on this table. And as a reminder, these trips, we mentioned it in the first webinar, you could calculate these trips from the trip rates that are in Appendix A of the manual that I previously shared. And if you can't find them in Appendix A, also you can use some trip equations if you're familiar with the ITE methods or the Institute of Transportation Engineer methods. They have trip equations instead of using rates. But if you don't even have that information, maybe you need to look in other sources or start collecting this information from locally, through some studies or things like this. So that might be something you can put into this action plan, where to get these rates, and if you have rates locally applied to your specific areas. Okay, so that's what this this table is showing. And like I just mentioned, this methodology takes a lot of standardized data points to create these tables. And yeah, exactly. What data sets are available to you, and if you have these data sets for your local conditions. So let's go over a few examples here. So I took some information from Appendix A. We have a little problem here. It says, find AM peak trips entering a development with 100 apartment units. So from Appendix A, I can look down at the residential area, and I see I have apartments and flats, and that's what I will want to use for my calculation. And I can see that the number of units is 1, so that means one apartment is considered a unit. And then there is the rate associated with one apartment and the splits or proportion of in and out trips. So this all comes from Appendix A. So from the 100 apartments that I have in my developments, I say I have 100 units. I multiply it by the rate, which is this 0.75. And then of course there's a unit to rate. And then I end up with basically 75 trips as my generated traffic. So it's pretty straightforward. Then when you look at the splits in and outs, my rule of thumb is to calculate the highest percentage first, even though you're interested in finding the AM amounts. I usually like to calculate the highest first, because that way when you round, you can round a little bit more accurately. So yeah, by calculating trips, you always want to kind of round up to the whole number, because you can't really have a half of a car or a fraction of a car. So, and generally people are rounding up to the nearest whole number of trips. So that's why I start with the highest first. So then within the trips coming out in the AM, the answer here is 11 trips, because I calculated the other one first. Yeah. So that's one example. There's another example here. If you want to go through that, kind of on your own when we send out the samples or the slides. Okay, so once you have trips, the next part is understanding the type of trip that you have. A development site could have multiple types of trips associated with it. There's always the classic example of the fueling station or gas station. In this case, there's the employee who's going to work, and then there's the customer, which is kind of, passing off the road and trying to fill up with fuel and then leaving again. And I'll expand on that in a second, but that's a good example of a type of land use that has multiple trip types. And once you know like what type of trip you have, or types of trips that you have, if it's adding traffic to the roadway network, or if it's actually subtracting traffic from the roadway network. And I'll get to that in a second. So the first trip type we have is primary trips, and these are generally considered new trips on the network, traveling to the development or from the development. For example, the easy thing to think of is going to and from the office. You go to the office from wherever you live, you go to that building, and then you go back home from the building. There's nothing really fancy about this. You just go there and back. The second trip type is internal capture. Sorry, looks like we got the microphone. The second trip type is internal capture. or internal trips. And the best way to think about this is, can we mute the microphone for a second? Thank you. Or do we get it? Okay. The best way to think about this is if you drive to a site and there's multiple stores or multiple types of business sharing the same parking lot, most likely you park once and then go to multiple places. Another place where this is common is in an urban center or a downtown center area where you park your car once in a parking lot and you walk to multiple shops or venues. So parking and walking to other places, this is basically an internal capture. So that doesn't mean that the trip associated with one place is going to be a vehicle trip. It's just going to be you walking across the parking lot or walking down the sidewalk to the next place. One thing is if you're at the office and you're going to lunch, so maybe you leave the office building and you walk 3 doors down to your favorite lunch spot, that is considered an internal capture trip at the lunch place. And then we have pass-by trips. As I mentioned, this is more of that fueling station. And this is associated with retail or service-oriented land uses. Yeah, so with the fueling station, before the fueling station was built, there were trips there. People were driving down that road, and then you built a fueling station. And once that fueling station was built, people are literally just driving off the road, getting gas, and getting back on the road. So in a lot of cases, all you're doing with a pass-by trip is changing it from a through direction and assigning it to a turn direction so you can go to the fueling station and then back on the main roadway again. Not all trips, again, are pass-by trips at a fueling station, for instance. Again, we mentioned the employees. Those people, the employees would be counted as your primary trips. From ITE's trip generation manual, I kind of looked it up, just curious. They said about 60% of trips going to a fueling station in North America are pass-by trips. Again, for you locally and wherever region you're at, this is a number you'll need to figure out if you're applying these trip types. So if you don't have this data for types of businesses and how many percentages of pass-by trips are associated to each business, it might be a good research area to collect that kind of data. And then lastly here, we have diverted trips. And this is similar to pass-by trips. But here, kind of think of like maybe a freeway interchange or a highway interchange, where you're driving along the main road and then you exit the main road to a side road to go to that gas station or that fast food restaurant or something like that. So you're leaving the main road, going onto a side road, and maybe going down, several hundred meters to do something, and then you immediately turn back around and you go back on the main road again. The difference is for here, while the main road, you're not really adding much traffic to it, you are adding all of that traffic to the side road this time. So that's the only difference, is you have to consider where you're adding the traffic with diverted trips. And then this could get really complicated quickly if you have a lot of intersections and roadways. TIA software can be very helpful to organize these trip types. You can see in the screen capture, there's a row that I have highlighted for diverted trips and for pass-by trips. And here you can actually enter the volumes that you're subtracting and adding to. So it's kind of a way to document it within the software. And it does the calculations and things for you automatically. So it's pretty helpful if you find software with that type of information in it. All right, so After you have trips and you understand what type of trip it is, then you look at the trip distribution. And with trip distribution, you're looking at the zones of where trips are coming to and from. So you have, let's say, the site in the middle, and the trips from that site's going somewhere or coming from somewhere. Those will be the zones and places you're distributing the traffic to. I mean, commonly these are, traffic assessment zones. Maybe they're like zip codes or something like that. It just really depends on how you have your areas set up. There's two common methods to analyze this trip distribution. One is an analogy method. It's pretty common for very small TIAs and very small sites. This is where you'll look at existing data sets, such as like maybe a traffic count, and your traffic count data will show some sort of trend or pattern saying, look, there's a lot of people coming from this side of the development and not so much people coming from this side of the development. And so your traffic data will show this distribution. Then when you put the development in place and try to distribute the trips, you'll tend to put more people on the side where people are coming to and from, and less people on the less busy side. So this is how you can use data in an analogy. Another method is a model-based method, and this is common for large sites. So if you have like a stadium or some place that generates tons of traffic, you probably will have a transportation model set up at this point, and you'll use this model, and the basis of this model, like the demographics and socioeconomic census data, all that stuff, to figure out how to distribute the trips. And then from that planning model, they may give you percentages or something and say, from your small place, put trips here, 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 and here. So that's kind of the model-based method. But like I said, most commonly, this analogy method is what's used for smaller trip generations. And then there's mode splits. These distribute the trips into cars or people walking or transit or something like this. And you need to consider the existing modes, the existing mode splits. If you don't have that data, you should go out and collect it, and maybe talk to your agency to see if they have that data. But you need to know if the people are walking there, or if they're riding there in the car, or if they're taking a bus. That way you know what to mitigate later when you get to your mitigations. There's a difference also between what's the existing mode split and then what a future mode split may be. So perhaps your agency will have some future plans to try to attract a different mode 20 years from now. So make sure you ask your agency what their future plans are, so you can apply that to the future, to your future scenario. All right, so understanding mode splits directly influences, again, the mitigations that you build. You have basically different modes take different roads to the site. So, and then different distribution zones may have different mode splits, and different modes will require different mitigations. This is kind of where you'll see where it's important to know what type of modes you have. So I found this study in Ethiopia, and I linked to this. And within this study, it's basically saying 94% of the trips in this city don't involve a car at all. So you have 70% walking and 26% are taking transit, and only 4% are taking the car. And if you just assume that you're going to mitigate for the car, chances are you're probably ignoring most of the people that actually need certain mitigations. So again, make sure you have this mode split data and understand how it will influence your traffic impact study. And I'll get back to that example a little bit later when we get into mitigations. Okay, once you have the mode splits, then you can go into these trip assignments. And a trip assignment is basically like the line that connects all your intersections and roadways together. So it's taking you from that distribution zone to your site and tracing the roads that you're going to take to get there. And again, this is critical because it's by tracing that line, you know at the intersection what turn is influenced the most, potentially, you know, what crosswalks might have to be improved or something like that, just by knowing how people are getting there. And with trip assignment, you know, sometimes it's not as intuitive as you think. Is it the shortest path? Some people think it might just be the shortest path. Or is it actually the shortest travel time that people are going to take to get there? Or it could be if you have a lot of bicycle traffic or pedestrian traffic, maybe they're just taking the safest path to the site and it's not the shortest path. For example, when I'm riding a bicycle, I often take a longer route in some cases because that route feels safer to me. So I'll take that route instead of taking the route I would take with a car. And then lastly, there's this engineered path. What do I mean by that? So it could be that maybe you want to force all the trips and assign all the trips on the path they should take, not necessarily the shortest path that cuts through side streets and neighborhoods. And so with this, then you can put all of the traffic on the engineered path. And when you develop your mitigations to improve it, you'll actually improve the path they should be on, not the side street that they shouldn't be on. So it's a little psychological impact there. Okay, and let's keep going on here. So now we're going to talk about the future horizon years and scenarios. And we talked about this a little bit last time when we developed the existing year and opening year. So we developed that base condition traffic. And then now, once you have that base condition traffic, you need to build on top of that and start looking at future year analyses, as well as add that the traffic impacts or the trip generation volumes on top of those scenarios. But for the future year analysis, typically you're looking like maybe 5 to 10, some agencies even look 20 years ahead from your opening year, when you put the development in place or any road improvement in place. You'll be looking those many years ahead to see how that improvement will behave with and without the development. And then that will also guide you into certain mitigations that you might have to do. And this slide here is, I like this one because it actually shows you how many scenarios you might have within your traffic impact assessment and how they all build off of each other. So as I mentioned, we have the counts from the existing year. That's what we did last webinar. And then we had counts for the opening, or we projected that into the opening year, and we did that last webinar. Now we have the future year. So again, we're looking at this opening year, adding more traffic to it. Potentially there's even some improvements that are being added to this, like the agency may be, you know, without your development, they may be adding turn lanes or something. So you need to make sure you add those background improvements. And then from there, then you're adding trip generation on top of that. So you have opening year with your trip generation and future year with your trip generation. And then you have another scenario of your opening year with trip generation, but then you mitigate it. And what are the benefits from mitigating it? And then there's a future year with mitigations. Now, to even complicate this any further, you have all of these scenarios, but then you also have your peak periods. So you're looking at like traffic sets from AM, noon, PM. You might even be looking at weekend or special time of year or special time of day. So your list of analysis scenarios and figures and data can be quite long. So here is kind of a snapshot again of your traffic impact analysis software. And having really good software can help you manage all of these scenarios in different times of days in one system. So you can quickly like kind of navigate back and forth between each set of data, copy the previous set of data to help you make the next set of data. So that's going to save you a lot of headaches. All right, so we have, again, capacity analysis, and I'm going to skip this mostly because I talked about capacity analysis last time. But since we were talking about TIA
how can
software,
I take off this here?
Sorry.
Oh, that's the conference.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to keep going. But since we were talking about traffic impact analysis software before, some of the software can also do capacity analysis on top of it. And since you already have all of your volumes and your trip generations and assignments and all of that stuff in the software itself, you might as well use it for the capacity analysis. And through this capacity analysis, this is going to give you a look at each scenario of what your KPIs are, like your level of service, what your volume to capacity ratios are, how long your queue lengths are, do you have increase in delay at the intersections or something like this. With these KPIs, this can also infer some safety situations that you might have. For example, if you're increasing the number of stops at a traffic light, you can infer that into more crashes because you have more stops, which could lead to more rear-end crashes. So that's kind of a way to make a parallel to safety problems. Another parallel maybe is if your queue lengths are extending outside of turn lanes, that can lead to some unsafe situations like side swipes or something like this. Or if they extend past the previous intersection and into beyond the intersection, that can also lead to further safety concerns. So you can kind of use capacity a little bit to say I have some safety impacts that I need to mitigate in the future. Which leads us into the safety analysis portion of today. So with the inferred capacity impacts, I mean, there's more safety stuff that needs to be looked at within a traffic impact analysis. Yes, we will share the presentation today after this. So yeah, cool. There's additional things that we need to look at for safety. So a lot of the issues will be looked at when you are designing the geometry. So there's the engineering part of safety. And that's like the sight triangles and then the circulation area of your driveways and how people can get in and out based on your turn lane lengths and stuff like I just mentioned. So there's that geometry part of safety. But then there's the other part of safety that isn't really vehicular. It's more about the pedestrians, the bicycles, the transit user. And it seems like in Africa, that's a major concern to provide safety for those vulnerable user types that aren't in the car. So with these vulnerable user types, you need to take these considerations in your TIA. And again, if local policies have like a Vision Zero plan or something like this, that's going to really require you to take a look at these safety concerns for vulnerable road users and make sure they're protected, because they're usually the ones that are going to get hurt first. Some safety resources that are available to you. There's road safety audit resources. I listed three types of guides here. One of them is a road safety audit guide. The road safety audit is something where you walk around kind of the neighborhood or area that you're doing your traffic impact assessment in, and you're kind of documenting dangerous situations and looking for things that might potentially cause accidents or crashes. These could be things like, again, bad sight distance. You would want to document that. But also maybe even a sidewalk is pretty narrow. When you're noticing people not really on the sidewalk, but on the road because they physically can't walk on the sidewalk because it's too narrow, you might want to document that because it's going to help you correct this during your mitigations. Especially if your site is generating a lot of transit trips and pedestrian trips, it's going to be somewhat your responsibility to make sure the trips that you're adding will be able to get there safely. So that's kind of why road safety audits are a pretty important part of the TIA process. And now let's go into mitigation measures. And I kind of want to slow down a little bit through this part because we're going to be talking again about this, this case study that was in Ethiopia. Yeah, now that you have your trips, you know where they're assigned to, you have an idea of what the capacity impacts might be, you have identified some safety issues with the road audit, it's time for your mitigations. And if the proposed development, of course, creates no additional impacts, I mean, I guess that means you've met the criteria of your local agency, you're not adding to the problem, then you may not even need to mitigate anything for your development. But obviously that's often not the case. So if you find that your proposed development has, significant impacts or even minor impacts to the transportation network, it's necessary to develop that plan, a mitigation plan that will help you first avoid, manage, and then mitigate impacts. And feasible measures should be identified that can help you do this. And these need to also be adopted by and approved by the local agency and governing agencies. So it's kind of a mutual agreement between the person doing the TIA and the developer and the agency to put that stamp of approval on this mitigation plan. All right, so back to Ethiopia here. Again, we have 70% pedestrians and overall 96% of the trips in this particular city were non-vehicle based. I found this interesting. You guys may not find it as interesting, but I found it interesting in this report that 80% of the road deaths were pedestrian related. And mostly this was due to the lack of safe crossing and facilities to handle such a large mode split. But also based off of this, you can kind of see this arrow right here. It said that a lot of the previously designed infrastructure in the city was actually car-oriented infrastructure. So it's not matching the mode split that I was mentioning before. It seems like if you're gonna spend the money, you should spend the money on the 96%, taking the the sidewalks and the bus and stuff like this. Some of the transit problems that they had were the lack of clear transit stops. The platforms weren't really defined very well. People didn't know where to stand. Some people were standing in the street. Sometimes the bus didn't know where to stop, more or less. So from these challenges, then a mitigation plan was put together. And I'll share that mitigation plan in a second. But first, I mean, there were some lessons learned from here, and the lessons learned were, you know, engage with the stakeholders early in the planning process. These stakeholders were the ones that were basically saying, like, why are you designing for the road users when most of the people are not arriving by car? Also, they could provide more information and intel kind of to the local condition. Another thing that was a lessons learned from the study was to enforce the traffic laws that were there. Since a lot of people were crossing the street illegally, if you put in a nice crosswalk, you know, maybe there's certain behaviors there that existed before that kind of can be corrected. So they found it was nice to have some law enforcement officers do some education and also communicate to people who were walking illegally to say, hey, we put these new crosswalks in, try to walk safely across the street. There were some other ones within the study, but they also did like this interim intervention. So they didn't put a ton of money in permanent infrastructure. They sort of painted on some striping and some fill in the intersection to kind of choke down the roadway visually and to provide some better guidance on where people should drive and where people should stand and walk, which is just paint. It's really cheap to do that. So they found a lot of benefit. So if you have a chance, take a look at that study, and I think you'll find some interesting mitigations that could also help you in your traffic impact assessment.
Adam, sorry,
okay,
just
so
to take perhaps
going back to this
Adam?
Mitigation triangle, the first part, of course,
Adam, I'm sorry,
is
can you
avoid
hear me?
problems. The earliest action is to make sure you have proper zoning and proper planning to avoid these problems. We talked about that again in the first webinar, to make sure zoning is there and be aware of what that zoning is. But this is where complementary land uses kind of can go together to increase perhaps internal capture, which would decrease vehicles driving on the road. I mean, maybe think about like a 15-minute city. That's like a buzzword these days. You know, 15-minute cities where all of your services are within 15 minutes and you can kind of walk there. So you don't need a car. So that's one example of avoidance. Managing measures, this lessens any adverse impacts. So this could be perhaps like a time of day turn restriction. So in the mornings, you can't turn left, but you can other times of days. It could be congestion pricing or something like this to kind of reduce people or have people come at other times of days, for example. And then the mitigation itself, this is what you can do when a mitigation can't be avoided. So, for example, if you're building a logistics shipping center or something, you're going to have a lot of trucks that are accessing the local site. Obviously, you can't get rid of those trucks. You have to have those trucks. So during this mitigation, you can manage these impacts by having, you know, safe specific routes for these trucks to take. You can make sure they avoid impacts in sensitive areas. And then for the turns in and out of that shipping facility, you can make sure they're big enough and long enough for trucks to actually get in and out safely. So that's kind of like the whole triangle all in one example.
Adam, this is Brendan. If I can come in for just a moment.
So
Adam,
here are some example mitigation measures. that I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can find these mitigation measures in the NACDO manual. If you're familiar with that manual, I put a link here. There's also kind of an international version of this manual as well. But these are some typical mitigations. And once you have these mitigations, again, it's not always the responsibility of the developer, I would say. You know, if the problem was there before the developer got there, the developer is probably not going to pay for it. The developer is going to pay for what they're more or less contributing to the issue or the problem. So it is the agency's responsibility to fix the no build part of the problem, and then the developer's responsibility to fix the trip generated problem of the problem. So sometimes agencies can't fix, you know, what is previously there because of funding issues or something. Sometimes there's, you know, backroom deals that could be made between the developer and the agency. Like maybe they kind of cut taxes for a year or something if they help pay for a roadway improvement or something for the no build condition. I'll leave that up to you guys on those backroom deals and what you can do. But there are things that often can be done. It also, if multiple developments are going on at the same time, for example, in this picture here, there may be several things going on this roadway. Then you look at, you know, kind of like the total impacts in your TIA. Even the other developments, you should be aware of what they're contributing. And you look at the total impacts, but then you say my development is only contributing this amount of trips to this particular turn or this particular through movement. So I should only pay for, you know, 30% of the impact, the total impact, because I'm only contributing 30% to this. That's what's called fair share assessment. And again, some TIA software does fair share assessment kind of for you, so you can see what that developer is responsible for. And again, a lot of this is just negotiation and back and forth between the developer and the agency to come up with what they're responsible for. And then the recommendations and conclusions that you can come from a TIA is that you summarize all of the information that we've talked about in the past couple webinars, and you basically can put it into those recommended mitigations. And what is important is when you recommend mitigations is to make sure that you have cost estimates developed for those mitigations. And again, that goes back to that fair share. You have to know how much it costs, and by knowing how much it costs, then you know how much you're responsible in paying. And again, it's a lot of info, of course, for the consultant to put into this report. The engineers, they have to go through all of those different analyses, but of course that's why they're getting paid. But remember, they're not getting paid an infinite amount of money to solve every issue in the area. TIAs generally don't have the funding and the funds to study everything in depth. So what I've bolded here down at the bottom is, I mean, it's a really good takeaway is make sure you document like proposed future studies that can happen. And it kind of sounds like, you know, maybe this is the guy didn't do his job, you know, in figuring everything out, but that's not the case. I mean, it's kind of like at the end of your TIA, you can recommend future studies that the agency should look at. And maybe the narrative kind of goes like this, where you say, hey, we found a lot of speed-related crashes here. And the data suggests that speeding is because of this, this, and this. And while we mitigated our impacts in the development with these improvements, The agency, I really think you should take a look at these existing problems a little bit more and look into maybe a formalized speed study or enforcing the area. So yeah, that's kind of like that narrative part when you can propose some from future studies at the end of a TIA. I guess one takeaway for agencies, I mean, embracing this TIA process, it does provide some great intelligence to local issues that maybe as an agency you didn't discover, but you can discover it through this process as these developers and consultants are kind of working more or less for you to understand what's going on. And then lastly, here's our last section, is the approval process. Just real quick, I mean, we started from the beginning with this pre-meeting and we all agreed on all of the assumptions and things from the very beginning. And if you did that in the very beginning, hopefully the agency is not surprised with the work that you did. And if they do make changes from this draft submittal of the TI report, if they have any suggestions or changes, hopefully it's very minimal because you were very upfront with them about what you're doing and the assumptions you made. So that's why in the first webinar, I was just really hitting that point. Talk with your agencies, talk with the agencies, get this approved, get that approved. Because when you get to this point here and submitting your draft report, if the agency comes back and is completely surprised with everything and your assumption was wrong, as you saw from all of the scenarios, it's a lot of work to redo things. So mitigate that. That's kind of I guess a TIA joke, but make sure you mitigate yourself so you don't get in the situation of having a lot of rework when you submit your draft and final reports. And finally, with luck, of course, your TIA was outstanding. The development was approved, mitigations are accepted, and construction begins. And you can go on to the next study somewhere else. So that's kind of the end of this part of the TIA, part 2.
Thank you very much, Adam, and that was a very optimistic sounding conclusion you just made. J'adresse brièvement un instant donc quelques soucis qui nous ont été rapportés au niveau de l'interprétation simultanée vers le français, potentiellement des problèmes de connexion, peut-être pour certains de nos interprètes. Si c'est quelque chose qu'ils peuvent éventuellement regarder dans les minutes qui viennent, ce serait très sympathique de leur part. Je vous remercie par avance et je présente mes excuses évidemment à nos collègues francophones qui ont eu quelques petits soucis apparemment sur la deuxième moitié du webinaire. Adam, thank you very much for again a very I think clearly presented set of guidelines. One of the main takeaways, certainly one of my main takeaways, is that these traffic impact assessments, they're more than a kind of a traffic modeling tool. They are an instrument effectively for stakeholders, for project stakeholders, to work together, align their views, align their expectations, and that's an additional reason to consider utilizing these systems. We have a couple of questions that have come in. I just want to check, Adam, are you still? Yes, you're still online, fortunately. Perfect. There are a couple of insights that have been shared, and I think one that has just come in and that I thought was very relevant, and I'll read it as is, and maybe you can kind of share insights from your real life experience on related to this topic. There have been some instances in which some of the agencies have been taken advantage of developers with regards to funding and cost sharing. Since most developers are desperate to have the development completed, they agree to fund the upgrades. In establishing these traffic impact assessments, what does the kind of the balance of power look like between the developers on the one hand and the agencies on the other?
I think I've seen both sides of that equation, where sometimes in some impoverished areas, like the developers are the ones dictating the terms because they need to create the jobs and things like this. So then the agency is the one bending over backwards to basically get the development in place. And then this point as well, I've seen that also where the agency is in a position where they can demand a lot of things. I mean, it's tricky, of course. I think as a consultant, they're the local experts and kind of providing insight onto how the agency functions. So in those beginning meetings that they may have with the developer, it's best for that consultant to be open and maybe prepare the developer from previous histories that could happen with the agency and see if they're willing to accept those things. And again, from previous knowledge in those beginning pre-meetings, perhaps you can even bring up those assumptions and say, hey, you know, we're going to prepare this TIA and we're going to show you the trips we're going to be responsible for, and that's what we're going to pay for. Is that okay with you? And just be very upfront with this. The better the TIA and more rock solid this mitigation process is, background data, and all of it is, I think makes it harder for the agency to take advantage of you in that case. So if everyone does a great job, hopefully, yeah, there's not much room for the agency to take advantage of the developer.
Or being taken advantage by the developer. I think, as you pointed out, it's a two-way street in some cases. A couple of technical questions have come in. If you're conducting a trip generation study for an urban area, do you factor in, I imagine you do, but how do you factor in the household size for each zone? You know, presumably this would have an impact on the type of traffic that is generated, certainly the volume of traffic.
Yeah, so this goes back probably to that. I listed the 3 methods for trip distribution. I think this is talking about trip distribution, not necessarily trip generation. So with the distribution, there's 3 studies. There was the analogy method, there was the model method, and then the last one kind of looks at the socioeconomic data and census data and stuff like this. If you're looking at household sizes, you're probably looking at the modeling method, not the analogy method. So you'll have a model, you'll have land uses, and within those land uses from the census, there's probably some sort of household information that would fit within that traffic impact zone or the zone being studied within the model. Most planners probably have a pretty good grasp on, you know, how to take the census data and apply it to that zone. And once you have that information, then you'll know that, you know, this zone has this many houses, this much population in it, and could go to and from the development from there. So a lot of it's just really the data that you have, I guess, from the census and demographics and stuff.
To the extent that the census provides accurate information, of course, sometimes a challenge in emerging countries. You mentioned, as staying on maybe some kind of a practical question. So you highlighted the importance of having a good understanding of the modal split to ensure that, you know, you're effectively, you know, factoring how people use the road network. I have a general understanding of, you know, how you count vehicular traffic. I'm less clear about how you count foot traffic. What are the kind of the tools of the trade, you know, to get a good understanding of what percentage of, you know, your traffic is in fact, you know, pedestrians just kind of walking around?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. A lot of times people are just counting intersections, and when you're counting intersections, you can pick up who's crossing at the crosswalks. I mean, that's easy enough. You say this person's using the crosswalk if they're using the crosswalks, and that will give you an indication of who's crossing at the intersection itself. But in general, the overall count of pedestrians, I mean, these days, people are using kind of the cellular data, I guess, and it's getting pretty good to identify who's actually moving by car and who's walking. So that there's that option to understand who's a pedestrian based on those big data sets. I mean, but the other thing is you could set some counters on the roadway links, perhaps, and just kind of get some samples around your study area. There's like microwave detectors, and those are really good at detecting, that's a car, but that's a pedestrian based on like a cross shoot across the roadway. And that will pick up maybe a percentage of pedestrians using each roadway or something like this.
Thank you. So different methods that are available to traffic engineers. Inevitably, I suppose, the number of questions have come in regarding, the type of TIA software that you would recommend. I realize this puts you in a somewhat sensitive situation, given that you're in the employ of one of these companies in question, but perhaps addressing the question from a generic standpoint, if you were, in the business of picking a software solution, how would you recommend that an urban planner, a consultancy, for instance, a traffic engineer, what are the questions that they should ask themselves in terms of picking the right tool for the job?
Yeah, out of the 3 or 4 softwares I can think of off the top of my head, and I should know them because I look at them every day, but off the top of my head, I mean, there's a couple classifications. There's one that just does capacity analyses, and not much traffic impact stuff can be put on top of it. So if you're really just looking at localized intersections and want to figure out capacity, you can do that. There's another software that only does traffic impact, it's more trip generation based. So you can put the trips in and you can distribute them around just to get the volume set, but it's not actually doing the capacity analysis. So if you're really just interested in the volumes, that could be a tool for you. It would be really easy to use. But then there's 2 softwares that kind of combine both, right? So for me, I think this is kind of the sweet spot for a TIA, because you need the capacity capabilities, you need obviously the trip generation, distribution, and assignment case capabilities. And really, as I pointed out, the scenarios there's many. So for me, having really good scenario management and being able to organize all of the data by scenario, by timing period, and building off of those, it's invaluable, because if there's a last minute change with good scenario management, that data will then the change can propagate to all of the other scenarios and update. So you don't have to go, like, if you did this by a spreadsheet, which I know probably a lot of you on the call do use, it's very tedious, very time consuming, prone to a lot of errors. So having the scenarios in the software is very helpful.
Thank you. And I believe another one of the industry trends that we're seeing is the development of this software as a service, type solution, where a lot of these applications are now becoming, a lot more kind of accessible, a lot less kind of resource hungry in terms of CPU resources, and the type of kind of computers that used to be required to run these applications. And at this point, a lot of that is behind us on account of the innovations that have been introduced by the software providers. So a lot of these systems, yes, I heard you reference, of course, a lot of people continue using Excel spreadsheets, and probably that's inevitable. But again, these specialized software solutions are now a lot more kind of accessible than they used to be. So that's a useful development in terms of putting those innovations in the hands of as many traffic engineers as possible. We have, I think, one final question, and then I want to be sure that we hand over to our colleagues on the African Development Bank. Is there a sense that with the developments that are going into these software solutions we just spoke about, and kind of more sophisticated traffic modeling systems, that there's less of a need for traffic counting stations, for instance, and that there's kind of less reliance on having these individual kind of points at which you actually measure traffic, but that you can kind of I guess extrapolate based on that data that you have, and perhaps some more of the more sophisticated models. Are we coming to a point where there's maybe less of the actual kind of traffic counting at each intersection that's needed, and more of a kind of a clever, well, it's not guesswork, but a clever modelization? If you could kind of look into your crystal ball for us.
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. I would say currently no, because a traffic impact assessment is generally like this engineering document, and most engineers want the ground truth data to compare. Of course, like what I mentioned in the first webinar is near your study area, you probably want these ground truth counts that you're physically taking. But as you move out farther to fit those higher level TIAs, because you're at level 3, there's probably no way you're going to get traffic counts for all the intersections. Then you could start blending in some of these I wouldn't say artificial counts, but counts like you're getting from software or big data or something. You can start blending these in, but at least you'll have the ground truth counts to see if they make sense. And I guess that's the important part. Is I would be afraid that if you use a travel demand model and the data in the travel demand model is old and not up to date, you're probably going to be missing something, and you could be over designing or under designing. So it's always best to have that ground data set, I would say. I don't think we're going to get away from that for a long time.
Okay. Oh, I mean, it's a very valid response. So to a question that was raised. Nejilabi, I believe you are on the call, and I'd like to take this opportunity again to extend a special appreciation to the African Development Bank, that has supported the development of these traffic impact assessment guidelines. Perhaps to share some insights on, where he sees, these guidelines as being kind of most useful for African cities.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you, Adam, for this presentation. Excellent presentation. I think we have a lot of information in this today, and our colleagues from everywhere here in presenting this webinar, they are asking a lot of questions. I think it's normal, and a lot of information brings a lot of questions. I just want to add some few probably information or comments to this presentation. The traffic impact assessment is generally concerned a small, let's say, site or development, and using travel demand. If you have this in your city and it's well adjusted and calibrated and updated every time, it will help. But it is very important that the impact is for the adjacent streets and the intersection around the site and around the development. You have a map, you know very well your location and the development of your site. It can help you more to go to the micro simulation, and the micro simulation software are for very big help to help you getting the results of the level of service, of the capacity, etc., and the design, the safety things. It's very important. A lot of softwares are on the market, and they are good, very good, excellent for some, and it's up to each municipality or city to get the right one. For the trip generation, I think there is no software who is doing the trip generation. Trip generation is something explaining in and out trips in modes, in terms of modes from different land use. What I will explain more in detail this. If you have this in your city, you have to develop this trip generation in the country itself, or in some few countries that they have the same behavior. Right now we have different trip generation books in America, in Europe, in different countries in Europe, Germany, probably UK, etc. But some things, many things are not the same in Africa. So they don't behave. People don't behave as the same as African people. So what I will suggest that the bank, through different funds, can help cities or countries to develop the trip generation in different countries, and it will be very helpful that you have the trip rates for each, let's say, characteristics of the land use, of the development, housing, cinema, culture. You have activities as offices, as medicine, as hospitals, many things. So they don't behave at the same rates, and you will have these rates for different period of the day, in and out. It depends on the characteristics of this. In the travel demand models in general, we explain the trips, person trips, in terms of socioeconomic characteristics, how people they move. Rich people with cars, with many cars, with without cars, poor people, how do they move in public transportation, etc. So there is a relation between all this, and this relation is obtained by service. So we have to understand how people they move, and we call this the trip generation related to the socioeconomic characteristics. But in trip generation for the development is related to the characteristic of the development itself. Number of square meters of offices, number of beds in hospitals, number of employees in some places where you have activities of employment, etc. So probably IRF and other institutions can help us to find the way to develop some trip generation handbooks for the African context. We will work on this and keep you in touch how it will work. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Najee. Thank you for these insights. And again, this is a conversation that we hope to pick up, in the run-up to and at the at a regional congress in Accra. And we'll be, bringing a number of traffic management specialists, including from local universities in Ghana. This may be an opportunity to kind of explore how this African trip generation model would work. But thank you again for highlighting these characteristics. I did note a reference to the 15-minute cities at the end of Adam's presentation. It'll be interesting to see if the concept picks up in Africa. It's very controversial currently in Europe and North America, but it's a very interesting topic, and it really goes to the heart, Najee, as you said, of really the socio-economic factors, underpinning, the need to move from one part of the city to another, indeed from one city to another nearby city. And it's important to have this fine understanding of what's going on your network. With this said, I believe we've now come to the end of the web. It's been a very fruitful learning experience for all of us. And we've enjoyed welcoming Adam back, and Adam has kindly agreed to join us in Accra, and where he will be teaching one of the workshops. So we hope to see you present there. We will be sharing, of course, the recording of today's webinar, the presentation. There'll be a short summary as well, and we will start providing some insights on this city level diagnosis and action plan as a structured way of thinking about some of these traffic generation and traffic safety issues that we are addressing throughout these webinars. So the template that we will be sharing is a way to kind of ask you to start thinking in a structured way about some of the problems you're encountering and some of the aspirations for your respective cities. And these are documents that we can, of course, review offline in line with these mentorship services I mentioned earlier as being a part and parcel of the program. But also these are documents that we can review together in Accra if we have the pleasure of seeing you for these workshops. So with this being said, I'd like to extend once again our thanks to Adam, to Neji, all of you who have participated and contributed with your wonderful questions. Before we sign off, there's a question regarding the certificates. We will be providing you with a form to complete so that we know which of the webinars you attended, and that we will be able to generate the number of continuing professional development hours accordingly. All of this will be included with the proceedings. Thank you for this helpful reminder. So with this said, I'd like to wish everyone a very fruitful and safe rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible next week for a final webinar where we will be coming back to the topic of traffic safety and looking at what Vision Zero means at the level of a city. Thank you once again, and we hope you have enjoyed this hour and a half that you have spent with us. Have a great rest of the day.
Enjoy your day too. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.